There's only a vague demand that parents be respected. After all, this is coming from, apparently, a father. There's nothing against racism. There's nothing against slavery. There's nothing against genocide. Partly because in these and ensuing chapters, all those things, racism, genocide, slavery, are actually going to be not just recommended, but enjoined, made an actual injunction on the children of Israel. They're going to be told to do these things. So it seems to me very obvious that what is known as religious morality is partly man-made, and it shows. It shows that it's made by a greedy and cruel, partly evolved, fairly highly evolved, let's not run ourselves down too much, primate species that turns out on examination to be, as we now know, 1/2 chromosome away from a chimpanzee. Well, the other objection, and it comes out of this one, is that religion gives us a false picture of moral reality. If it were true that religion was the source of morals and ethics, then you'd have to be able to answer the following two questions that I'm going to pose to you, and take your time to answer them. We have plenty of time to discuss this when we move to the public phase of this evening. You have to name for me a moral action committed or an ethical statement made by a believing person, by a person of faith, that I couldn't make as an unbeliever. Okay? I've challenged the Archbishop of Canterbury on this in public, and many other spokesmen of many religions. I've not yet had a persuasive answer. You have time. Think of something I can't do that's moral, or I can't say that's moral or ethical, because I'm not a believer. Take your time. Now there's a corollary question. Think of a wicked thing done, or an evil thing said by somebody purely because they are a person of faith. You've already thought of one. You don't need any prompting from me. The suicide murder community is almost entirely faith-based. The genital mutilation of children is exclusively religiously motivated. Sins that hadn't been thought of before, things that we've hardly had time to think of condemning, are actually advocated by men of God, and often in the name of God, as a matter of obedience to his will. So just bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you do want things to get a little warm later on, that I, for one, will take it as extremely insulting if any person of faith makes the assumption that their faith gives them a moral edge on me. I want to hear a lot more apologizing from the faith-based communities for the evil that they've done before they even start clearing their throats and telling me I wouldn't know right from wrong without their permission. I'm sorry, I won't be, can't be spoken to in that tone of voice, and nor should any of you. On with the false picture of reality. Religion has its grandeur. The reason why this discussion is always so interesting, always so worth having. The magnificence of religion comes from the fact that it was first. It was our first attempt. It was our first attempt to make sense of the cosmos, our first cosmology, our first attempt at philosophy. In many ways, and in some of the books, our first attempt at literature and poetry. In some ways, our first attempt at medicine, even at physics, at all the sciences and some of the arts. This was humanity's first fumbling attempt to look at the sky and see where it fitted in. All credit to religion for trying this. Someone had to. But because it was the first, it is also in many ways the worst. What happens when you don't have a germ theory of disease and you wonder where the plagues are coming from? Well, you either think they're a punishment from God, or you think, depending on how far we've gone along into the medieval years of religion, they come from the Jews poisoning the wells, or from witchcraft, or from people not going to their prayers enough. The same about natural phenomena, like earthquakes or floods. There must be a supernatural explanation for things that, of course, we now know can be much better and more accurately explained for us. So the fact that we are still burdened by the false picture given of reality and of nature by religion is, I think, not the smallest of the indictments against it. You still hear, at times like Katrina or the Pacific tsunami, you will still hear men of religion, including in civilized and advanced and educated countries such as England, the bishops saying, this is because of sin that there is an inundation. And out of this, it seems to me again, we must teach ourselves, as developed humans, evolving humans, to grow. there are essentially two choices once we've got past the fearful childhood of our species and the terror with which we had to face reality in those days. We can either say of ourselves and to ourselves that we are here because of a divine design, or we can admit that we are here because of processes we don't fully understand, but that are cosmological in the first instance, the Big Bang, and Darwinian, to give it a shorthand, the consequence of evolution by natural selection and random mutation in the second. Now, it's an interesting thing that religion now wants, having fought very strongly against cosmology, having fought against any discovery that threatened the idea of a man and God-centered Earth that was itself the center of the solar system, that was itself the center of the universe, and having fought very hard and still fighting against the idea of evolution by natural selection. The great thing about being religious is this: when the evidence against you becomes overwhelming, and you can see the amazing intricacies of the Big Bang, and the extraordinary matter of the Hubble red light shift, and the things we can now see through Mr. Hubble's telescope, and when you see the extraordinary variety of species, religion says, come to think of it, that is true. In fact, it shows that God was even more ingenious than we had thought it in the first place. What's my objection to this kind of argument? Well, of the many I could make, the first is simply this: it's completely impossible to refute. Because every time any new evidence comes to light, it's claimed for, well, it fits with the unoverthrowable theory that we already have. Some of you would have been taught already, I hope, that a theory that can be described as unfalsifiable is to that extent a very weak theory. And that seems to me to apply with overwhelming force to the religious or godly explanation of our presence here and the natural phenomena around us. I can imagine a little pressed for time. Can you give me a rough idea? Okay, that's not long. I'm going to be very quick and say what I've been implying, and I was going to lead up to a bit more slowly, which is that this referring upwards of these questions of responsibility, of freedom, of inquiry, this referring upwards of them all the time to a celestial authority is, in my opinion, as well as futile intellectually, potentially very sinister, because what it suggests is that we are governed by a kind of celestial dictatorship, by an unanswerable to unchangeable authority in the sky that can watch us, keep us under permanent surveillance, keep us permanently under watch, can convict us of thought crime, can guard us while we sleep, and that carries on this process of surveillance and supervision even after we are dead. It seems to me this would be a horrible thing if it were true. It would be worse than any known tyranny has ever been. But that in itself puts me in mind of something, which is that most of the tyrannies under which humans have labored in the past and continue to labor under in the present have in their essence been theocratic. Because once you can give to any other group of mammals and primates, any other group of humans who are essentially no better than you, the right to say that they speak in God's name, that they know God's will, that they have God's authority and God's permission, then there is no limit to the kind of totalitarian misery that can be inflicted on you. In the real world, in the very few years of existence and life and potential freedom that we absolutely know for a sure thing we do have, that are not part of the metaphysic, but that are our common property, are our birthright. And this has been true since the early theocratic tyrannies of the Aztecs, the Babylonians, through to the idea of the tyrannies of feudalism and monarchism against which the American Revolution was mounted, to many of the terrible 20th century tyrannies, fascism, Hitlerism, the South African system of apartheid, which was a branch entirely of the Dutch Reformed Church and its belief that there was a divine mission on their side, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is shortly to get its own apocalyptic and Armageddon weapon, and other threats which make me think, and I'll rest my case here and wait for rebuttal, made me think that the battle against the religious illusion is part of a very important battle, not just for human emancipation, but actually potentially, if not really, imminently, also for human survival, and therefore a battle that we dare not lose. Thank you.